Some pirates are so heavily steeped in legend and lore that it can become hard to discern what about them exactly is fact and what is fiction. One such pirate is Captain William Kidd, a Scottish privateer turned pirate who was ultimately executed in 1701 at the relatively young age of 47. In death, Captain William Kidd has become one of the most romanticised pirates of all time, with widespread belief existing to this day that he buried his treasure. This has inspired many modern-day treasure hunts across the Americas, the coasts of Africa, and even Asia, with numerous individuals claiming to have found silver bars supposedly belonging to Kidd. As it stands, none of the treasure uncovered has been traced back to the notorious privateer, but his name is still revered the world over nonetheless. Not only did Captain William Kidd lead a life of adventure across the high seas, but he also died a particularly grisly death, unsurprisingly at the hands of the authorities. Today we will briefly examine the life of William Kidd before taking a look at his ultimate demise, a particularly grisly event that some viewers may find disturbing. Proceed with caution as we enter the treacherous waters of the golden age of piracy once again to explore the execution of William Kidd. Who was Captain William Kidd? As is usually the case with all of the notorious pirates and privateers of the Golden Age, not much is known about the early years of William Kidd's life. Historians have discerned that he was born before the October of 1654 in Dundee, Scotland. He was raised in a religious community, he received a baptism at an early age, and his father was once thought to have been a minister of the Church of Scotland. At some point in William Kidd's early 20s, he travelled to North America, settling in New York City just after the English had seized it from Dutch forces. It is thought that he managed to find work as an apprentice sailor on board a pirate ship, all the while maintaining good relations with officials and navymen in New York. Although he would become known primarily as a privateer for much of his career, Kidd started and ended his career as a pirate, sailing across the Caribbean. It took a while for him to rise to the rank of captain, however, and he first found himself sailing as a member of Jean Fantin's crew in the late 1680s. William Kidd would eventually find his chance to rise through the ranks when a mutiny took place on board Fantin's ship. Kidd is thought to have led a mutiny against the captain, removing him from the ship and taking it as their own. The ship was actually renamed to Blessed William following this event, and Kidd was elected as the captain. Before long, Kidd found himself working with Christopher Codrington, the governor of Nevis, a British Caribbean colony. When Kidd joined Codrington's fleet in a fight against the French navy, the governor ordered the privateers to take their pay directly from the French colonies, and so Kidd and his men looted and raided, taking everything they could. From this point onwards, Kidd had cemented his reputation as a fearsome and skilled privateer and was employed by Richard Coote, the first Earl of Bellamont and governor of New Hampshire, to actively hunt pirates. His targets were either the likes of John Island, Thomas Wake and William Mays, or enemy French ships that threatened British forces in the Caribbean. It would have been unwise for Kidd to refuse. To decline this offer would be to decline an offer from the British Crown, making Kidd himself an enemy. Noble lords of England had funded the majority of the expedition, and Kidd was officially employed as a privateer by approval of King William III. Aboard his new ship, the Adventure Galley, Kidd selected his crew and took to the seas. It was not a successful voyage. 1/3 of Kidd's crew had died by September 1696 from a cholera outbreak on board the ship, and the situation didn't improve after the ship sprung several leaks. Moreover, Kidd found himself sailing around the coastlines of Madagascar, where he had, as of yet, failed to find any of the pirates he sought. Constant threats of mutiny were made against Kidd as he struggled to keep his crew happy and healthy, which did little to improve the mood on board the ship. On the 30th of October 1697, Kidd murdered one of his own crewmen out of pure anger alone. William Moore, a fellow privateer gunner, was sharpening his tools when a Dutch ship appeared on the horizon. Moore insisted that Kidd should order his crew to attack it, but Kidd refused. If he attacked the ship, they would be classed as pirates, not privateers, as the English were no longer at war with the Dutch. The pair exchanged insults for a few minutes before Kidd grabbed an iron-bound bucket, smashing it over Moore's head. It took him a full day to die. Captain William Kidd's capture. As Kidd's expedition continued to fail, accusations of brutality began to arise from his escaped captives. Kidd was not permitted to torture those that he captured on his voyage, but this is supposedly what he did. Escapees told stories of being beaten and slashed with cutlasses, which painted Kidd in a terrible light in the eyes of the law. Kidd was formally declared a pirate by the Royal Navy, and he was officially a wanted man. His status did not improve when he sacked French ships, keeping the spoils for himself rather than taking it back to the crown. Kidd did eventually manage to find one of his bounties, a pirate by the name of Robert Culliford, a notorious marauder originally from Cornwall in England. What happens next is unclear, but it is known that Culliford survived the ordeal. Either Kidd cordially approached Culliford peacefully, offering him a drink, or, slightly more likely, Kidd ordered his crew to attack the rival captain and failed. Reportedly, his crew refused to attack Culliford and threatened their own captain instead. It is generally agreed that in the end, most of Kidd's men left him for a better life on board Culliford's ship. 13 remained at Kidd's side, who briefly returned to the sea with him before returning to their homes in North America. In 1698, when the English crown issued the Act of Grace offering a pardon to all pirates in the Indian Ocean as long as they stopped committing crimes, Kidd was specifically ruled out of it. He could never receive a pardon and was permanently on the run. The English crown sent out man of war ships to search for him, some of the most technically advanced and difficult to overpower military ships of the time. Kidd sold his goods and abandoned his ship in the Caribbean Sea, avoiding New York City due to his wanted status and the presence of his mutinous crewmates in the city. Ironically, it was Richard Coote that arrested Kidd and took him to the authorities for a trial. Coote lured Kidd to Boston under the false pretense that he would be pardoned, but when Kidd arrived in the port, he was arrested and taken to the Boston jail, where he was kept in solitary confinement. The execution. Kidd's final years were particularly brutal. While in jail, he was permitted minimal contact with the outside world and any other people, conditions which are thought to have rendered him temporarily insane by clinical standards. The imprisoned pirate was used as a tool to deter other would-be offenders and also to lure in those who backed him. Kidd refused to surrender any names to the authorities, so the authorities put him on trial in the High Court of Admiralty. Kidd was taken to London, faced with both charges of piracy on the high seas and the murder of his former crewmate William Moore. Whilst in London, Kidd was kept in Newgate Prison, one of the most notorious facilities in all of England. When Kidd was placed on trial in London, he didn't even hear of his murder charge until the trial began. He was shocked that they would try him with this, a crime that, if convicted, would mean certain death. Kidd was ultimately found guilty of 5 counts of piracy on the high seas and the single count of murder, and was indeed sentenced to death. On May the 23rd, 1701, William Kidd was taken to Execution Dock, the infamous execution site where many of the most notorious pirates of the Golden Age met their end. Kidd was executed alongside 2 Frenchmen who were seated in a horse-drawn carriage that paraded through the London streets towards the docks. A huge crowd had gathered to witness the execution, which would be carried out at the gallows. Both Kidd and the 2 Frenchmen would be hung for their crimes. At 5 in the evening, when the sun was low in the sky and the tide had drifted out, Kidd was marched to the gallows and addressed the crowd. He warned would-be pirates of his fate, urging them to avoid the lifestyle he had so fervently followed. The noose was placed around Kidd's neck and the hangman pulled the lever to end his life. The rope dropped and snapped. Kidd's execution had failed and he fell to the ground coughing and spluttering with the noose still wrapped around his neck. Dazed and shocked, but in no way dead, he received his last rites once more and the executioner attached a new noose to the gallows, wrapping it around his throat. This time when the lever was pulled, the execution was successful. The rope remained in one piece, and at the end of it was Kidd's body dangling lifeless in front of the lapping waves amidst the cool evening air. Even in death, Kidd could not rest. His lifeless body was taken to Tilbury Point, where it was hung by the mouth of the River Thames in a gibbet, a steel cage used to display bodies in order to deter other would-be pirates. It is unknown if Kidd's remains were ever even removed from Tilbury Point. Some say that when the next body was due to hang at Tilbury Point, Kidd's remains were simply thrown into the Thames, where they still lie to this day. If he was buried, the location of his grave is unknown. Outro. So that is the grisly life and even grislier death of Captain William Kidd, one of the most notorious but ultimately failed pirates who met a tragic end at the hands of the law. Kidd's death is very similar to the ends met by many of the most well-known pirates of the Golden Age. Very few of the most notorious individuals were able to escape with their riches and live a peaceful life. Kidd's death perhaps is met with a deeper air of tragedy. From the moment he set out on his privateering expedition, he was doomed to die. All the factors, from his faulty ship, his mutinous crew, and the fact he was excluded from the pardon, meant that this was an unavoidable fate. Despite all the details included in this video, there is still very much we have to learn about Kidd's life and death. Perhaps one day, with future historic discoveries, we may learn even more about the life and times of this long-lost pirate. Thank you for watching this episode of Walk the Plank. Please do subscribe if you're enjoying these videos, and I'll see you next week for another one. Cheers, have a great week.